There comes a moment in life when nothing is technically wrong. The job is fine, the relationship is fine, people who love you think you're doing well. And yet, something inside you has gone very, very quiet. Not sad exactly, not broken, just finished. You still laugh at the right moments, you still reply to texts, you still show up. But you can feel it, something in you is no longer fully participating. Like something that used to run on fuel is now running on memory, and you don't know when it stopped, and you don't know how long you've been pretending it hasn't. Most people at this point do one of two things. They panic and try to fix it, or they go numb and learn to ignore it. Carl Jung believed both responses were a catastrophic mistake. He believed this feeling, this sourceless emptiness beneath a life that looks completely fine, was not a breakdown. It was a beginning. The beginning of the rarest psychological transformation a human being can experience. A stage so demanding, so disorienting that Jung himself wrote, "In the psychic development of modern man, this stage is rarely reached." He called it the Sophia Stage. And everything you think you know about wisdom, about growth, about who you are. Sophia will not leave it intact. Once this clicks, you'll start seeing it everywhere. What you're about to hear is not self-help. It is a map of what happens when the deepest part of a human being finally wakes up. Once you see it, you will not be able to unsee it. To understand Sophia, you have to understand what she's the end of. Jung believed something most modern psychology hasn't absorbed. The human psyche is not a fixed thing you manage. It evolves. It grows through distinct stages, not automatically, not comfortably, only through confrontation, crisis, and the willingness to be changed by what you find inside. The engine of that evolution is what Jung called the anima. For men, the anima is the unconscious feminine dimension of the psyche, the soul image, not a metaphor, an actual structural reality as measurable in its effects as gravity. The invisible force behind every time a man has fallen inexplicably in love, been seized by grief he couldn't explain, or felt, under the noise of his life, a longing he couldn't name. The anima moves through 4 stages. Jung named them with mythological precision, not for poetry, but because these names capture exactly what each stage feels like from the inside. Eve is the primal feminine, nourishment, security, the unconditional warmth of the mother world. The man at this stage is organized structurally, not consciously, around dependency. He needs a woman's emotional steadiness to feel safe. He mistakes her stability for his own inner peace. This is the man who texts, "Are you mad at me?" 4 times without a reply. The man who calls it love but means, "Don't leave." Most men spend their 20s here. Many spend their entire lives here. After Helen of Troy, the face that launched 1,000 ships. In this stage, the anima erupts as desire, consuming, intoxicating, impossible to satisfy. The man possessed by Helen falls in love with potential and grows bored with reality. He moves from person to person not out of cruelty, but because the living human in front of him keeps failing to match the luminous image inside him. He isn't seeing her, he's seeing his own soul, projected outward, burning on someone else's face. This is where most modern men are living, and this is where the modern world wants them. Because a man permanently in the Helen stage is the perfect consumer, always hungry, always almost satisfied, always one more thing away from the feeling he's chasing. We'll return to this, because this is where everything starts to explain itself. Here, something genuinely beautiful begins. Mary brings the capacity to see another person as real, not a need, not a projection, but an actual human being with an interior life independent of his own. This is where lasting relationships become possible for the first time, where spiritual depth enters not through doctrine, but through genuine awe. This is the man who can finally love without needing to control. Most men who do serious inner work reach Mary and stop there. And that's genuinely beautiful. But it is not the end. The Greek word for wisdom, not clever wisdom, not the wisdom of someone who has read a lot. Sophia, the wisdom that has descended into the darkest places of the inner life and returned transformed. At this stage, the inner feminine no longer appears as a need, a projection, or an ideal. She becomes a guide, a direct, navigable connection to the deepest contents of the unconscious, to meaning itself. Sophia is Beatrice leading Dante through paradise, not the Beatrice he romanticized at 14, but the transfigured Beatrice who appears only after he has walked the full weight of hell. She is the muse who arrives not when life is comfortable, but when life has finished you. Jung said this stage is rarely reached, not because people lack intelligence, not because they lack spirituality, because almost no one is willing to pay what it costs. What does it cost? You cannot think your way to Sophia, you cannot buy your way there, you cannot weekend retreat your way there. Sophia has 3 gates, each one takes something you will not want to give. Your persona is the mask, the social self, the competent professional, the reliable partner, the person who has it together. The persona isn't the enemy, it's necessary. Without it, you can't function in the world. But at a certain point, usually somewhere in the late 30s or 40s, the mask begins to tighten. The accomplishments feel smaller than they should. The things that drove you no longer land. A quiet, inarticulate dissatisfaction installs itself underneath the surface of your life. Jung called this the noonday devil, the crisis that arrives at the height of apparent success. And it's not depression, though it's often misdiagnosed as such. It's the psyche sending a signal. The mask has become a prison. Something needs to die so something else can live. The first gate demands that you let the persona fall. Not the dramatic midlife crisis version, the sports car, the affair. That's one mask replacing another. I mean the genuine, terrifying act of standing before yourself without the title, without the reputation, without the story you've been telling yourself about who you are. Most people, when the foundation begins to loosen, double down. They work harder. They renovate the prison and call it growth. That is why most people never pass through gate 1. This is where it gets dangerous. The shadow is everything you have buried, not just the dark things, the rage, the cruelty, the envy, but the good things you didn't feel entitled to. The ambition buried because it seemed arrogant, the grief buried because it seemed weak, the wildness buried because the world required you to be reasonable. The shadow accumulates everything you split off to build the persona. And it doesn't disappear. It goes underground and runs you from below. You know this. The relationship that fails the same way with different people, the argument you keep having with different faces on the other side, the self-defeating pattern that survives every attempt to reason your way out of it. That is the unexamined shadow driving. Shadow integration requires something genuinely difficult, sitting with the qualities you most despise in other people and recognizing them in yourself. The cowardice dressed up as wisdom, the jealousy dressed up as principle, the cruelty you are capable of. This is not self-punishment, it is seeing clearly. And here is what Jung discovered. The shadow, once genuinely seen, loses most of its power. It is the unseen shadow that destroys. The seen shadow can be worked with, even transformed. The rage that became self-destruction, channeled, becomes the ability to hold a boundary. The grief that became numbness, finally allowed, becomes the capacity for genuine love. But there is no shortcut. You cannot reach Sophia while still fleeing from yourself. Before Sophia can guide you, you have to survive the earlier stages of the anima without being consumed by them. The Eve stage, unexamined, fuses a man to dependency he can never see. The Helen stage, unexamined, can consume decades, a brilliant person chasing an image of his own soul that no external person will ever satisfy. Even the Mary stage has a shadow, emotional unavailability dressed up as spiritual depth. When we are possessed by an archetypal force rather than in conscious relationship with it, the archetype doesn't serve us, it uses us. The unconscious anima generates moods that arrive from nowhere, irrational sensitivities, sudden crashes, the feeling of being weathered by forces you can't name. Every man who has ever said, "I don't know what came over me," after destroying something he loved, was in the grip of an anima he had never faced. To pass this gate, the anima must become known, not suppressed, not worshipped, spoken to, listened to, given expression in the waking life. 3 gates, 3 forms of self-confrontation, 3 things you must be willing to lose. Most people choose not to pay the price, and then wonder at the end of their lives why something always felt unfinished. What's waiting on the other side? Before we go any further, let me tell you what Sophia looks like in a living person. Because this is not abstract, this is something you can recognize. Sophia looks like someone who can be completely misunderstood and remain calm, not detached, not above it, calm from a place that criticism cannot reach. Someone who carries a weight in their presence that you register before language has time to process it, who, when you talk to them, makes you feel simultaneously smaller and larger because they're not seeing your performance, they're seeing you, and somehow that is both terrifying and the most relieving thing you've ever experienced. You've met someone like this, maybe once, maybe twice. That is Sophia embodied. Now she has always been here, not just in individuals, in every culture, every civilization, every spiritual tradition that has ever existed. She is the wisdom of Proverbs personified as a woman calling from the highest points of the city. I was there before the foundations of the earth. I was the craftsman at God's side. She is the Hagia Sophia, the great cathedral standing in Istanbul for 1500 years, whose name in Greek means holy wisdom, not the wisdom of doctrine, the wisdom of encounter. She is the central figure of the Gnostic Gospels, the hidden texts buried in the Egyptian desert in the 4th century and not rediscovered until 1945. In those texts, she is Pistis Sophia, the Sophia of faith, a divine principle that descends into darkness willingly and rises transformed, the first great archetype of the soul's journey through suffering into light. She is Beatrice in Dante's Divine Comedy, the transfigured Beatrice who appears only in paradise and who can only be encountered by someone who has already descended through hell. Jung saw this universal appearance across cultures that had no contact with each other, not as coincidence or cultural borrowing. He saw it as evidence of structural psychological reality. Sophia is not a symbol we invented. She is a fact about the architecture of the human psyche, built in, waiting. Sophia bridges opposites. This is one of Jung's most radical insights, and it has been badly misunderstood. Psychological health is not the elimination of inner conflict. It is the capacity to hold genuine tension between opposites, between order and chaos, between what we know and what we cannot know, without collapsing toward either side. Most people, when confronted with genuine psychological opposites, collapse. They choose the comfort of a fixed identity over the terror of genuine openness. Sophia makes something else possible. Jung called it the transcendent function, the capacity to sit in genuine discomfort long enough until something entirely new emerges, not a compromise, something genuinely new. Every truly creative person has touched this. The musician who wakes at 3 a.m. with the resolution that effort couldn't find, the writer whose ending arrives whole and unbidden after weeks of nothing, the scientist whose breakthrough came not from deliberate work but from the unguarded moment between sleep and waking. That is Sophia working, not mystical fantasy, psychological fact. There is a story documented in Jungian literature I have never been able to forget. Jung had a patient, a Jewish intellectual, immensely accomplished, so fully alive in her depth that he described her as the most complete embodiment of the Sophia archetype he had ever encountered in a living person. He reported that he dreamed of her. In the dream, he was kneeling before her. Carl Jung's nailing. Not from romantic feeling, not from social performance. From recognition. That person was not born that way. She went through the 3 gates and chose not to stop walking. But why does our world make this so rare? Why isn't this the norm? Think about the Helen stage. The stage of endless projected desire, where the inner image is thrown outward onto an infinite series of objects, products, experiences, faces, identities, where satisfaction is always almost here, where the hunger never actually resolves. Now think about the economy you live inside. A man who has genuinely integrated his anima, who has moved towards Sophia, who no longer needs the external world to fill an interior hole, is a terrible consumer. He doesn't need the upgrade. He doesn't need the next hit of novelty. He doesn't need to perform a curated identity to feel real. He is already somewhere. A man permanently in the Helen stage, however, is an engine. He is always hungry, always almost satisfied, always one more thing away from the feeling he's chasing. The attention economy didn't create this mechanism, but it industrialized it with extraordinary precision. The platform is not designed to help you grow. It's designed to extract engagement. And engagement is generated most reliably not by satisfaction, not by depth, but by the unending stimulation of unintegrated desire, beauty, comparison, the endless scroll of faces and lives that trigger the Helen stage projection mechanism like a slot machine triggers dopamine. You feel, you want, you don't get, you scroll again. And here is what happens to the shadow inside this system. The shadow, which must be confronted to allow any genuine growth, has no place in the world of personal branding. You cannot post your shadow. You cannot monetize your genuine darkness. The algorithm rewards the performance of growth, not actual growth. So the shadow accumulates, unprocessed. It leaks into comment sections, road rage, political tribalism, all the hostility that belongs to the unintegrated interior, redirected outward onto surfaces that cannot absorb it. And the deepest issue, the inner work required to pass through the gates toward Sophia, the genuine solitude, the willingness to sit with discomfort, to be undone, these are precisely the states the attention economy interrupts, at maximum efficiency. Every time you reach the threshold of genuine inner discomfort, the discomfort that, if you stayed with it, might become something, the phone vibrates. And the moment passes, the gate closes, you remain where you were. And I want to be honest, I'm not above this. I've watched it happen in myself. The reach for the phone at the exact moment something difficult was beginning to surface. That's not weakness, that's the system working exactly as designed. But here is what the system cannot take from you. The anima is still there. Sophia is still waiting. The hunger you feel, the restlessness, the sense that something is unfinished, that is not a malfunction. It is not proof that something is wrong with you. It is a compass pointing toward something no algorithm can sell you. 4 orientations, not habits, not a routine. Structural reconfigurations of how you relate to your own interior life. Call them the 4 gates in reverse, because the path toward Sophia retraces consciously what life stripped away unconsciously. The inner journey cannot be avoided, only delayed, and delay always increases the cost. The descent will happen through loss, through crisis, through the inevitable stripping of the persona. The only choice is whether you go voluntarily or get dragged. The person who begins voluntarily retains agency. They navigate the dark instead of being destroyed by it. The practical beginning is simple. Identify the one thing you most consistently avoid thinking about, the pattern you don't examine, the grief you keep scheduling around. Start there, not to solve it, just to look at it. The descent begins the moment you turn toward what you've been turning away from. Jung's most transformative practice, misunderstood by almost everyone who talks about it secondhand. Active imagination is not meditation, it is not visualization. It is the deliberate act of entering into genuine dialogue with the figures of your unconscious, your recurring dreams, the inner critic you've been trying to silence, the images that surface in unguarded moments. Jung practiced this for years during the period that produced the Red Book, his private journal of confrontation with the unconscious, written between 1914 and 1930, published only in 2009 because even he was uncertain the world was ready. In it he sat with images that arose in him, spoke to them, wrote down what they said back, allowed them to challenge him, show him what he'd refused to see. If a figure keeps appearing in your dreams, recurring, disorienting, do not dismiss it. Ask it what it wants, write down what comes. Do not interpret record. The parts of you without a voice will find one if you give them space. Every transition between anima stages is precipitated by crisis. The psyche does not move without necessity. The midlife reckoning, the relationship that ends and takes your identity with it. The career collapse that forces a reckoning with what you'd confused for worth. These are not punishments, they are the psyche's way of forcing the next movement. The person who learns to stay present in crisis, who can sit in the disorientation long enough to hear what it's saying, develops something practically extinct in the modern world. Not stoicism, something more honest, the willingness to be changed by what happens to them. Each collapse is a gate, the gate only opens inward. Sophia cannot be forced, she can only be received. The masculine principle, what Jung called logos, operates through will and effort, necessary but insufficient. Sophia operates through a different mode entirely, attention, receptivity, the willingness to be genuinely surprised by your own interior life. Not productive solitude, listening solitude, not consuming art, being disturbed by art, not performing depth, sitting with the questions that have no immediate answer. Jung wrote that emotion is the chief source of becoming conscious. The feelings you most want to avoid are often the ones most pregnant with meaning. The grief you keep rescheduling, the longing you keep rationalizing, the awe that embarrasses you. These are her footprints. Follow them. There is an inscription above the gate of hell in Dante's Divine Comedy. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. For most of human history, those words were read as a warning against damnation. Jung read them differently. The hope that must be abandoned is not hope for the future. It is the hope of avoiding the journey, the hope that wisdom can be purchased, that growth can be practiced painlessly, that you can become whole while remaining exactly as you are. That hope must go, not because the journey is hopeless, because it is only when you release the hope of a shortcut that the actual path becomes visible. Sophia, the fourth stage, the highest stage, the stage that is rarely reached, does not wait as a reward for suffering. She is not compensation for pain. She is the natural destination of anyone who refuses to stop becoming. She is the wisdom that has been wounded, the guide who knows the dark because she has lived in it, the voice inside you that you have spent your whole life almost hearing. The hunger that brought you here is not accidental, the restlessness, the sense that something enormous in you has never been lived. That is not a symptom. That is Sophia at the gate. The only question that has ever mattered, is whether you have the courage to answer. If something in this reached something real, share it with one person who needs to hear it. Not for the algorithm, because this is exactly the kind of conversation the modern world is structured to prevent. I'll see you in the next one.